$1, one whip. They whipped the alien woman for fun until one human stepped in.
The rain on Voron's Edge was the kind that made the air heavy and streets slick like glass. It gathered in the seams of the stone market square, mixing with oil runoff from nearby repair bays until every step left a muted rainbow smear. The sound of it was constant, on the patchwork awnings, on the steel gutters, on the puddles that rippled under passing boots. Karen Thale walked with his head low, his black coat collar up against the wind. He just finished delivering a Restore Navigation Core to a shipping guild office on the far side of the docks. It was late enough that most traders had closed up, but the night market stayed open for anyone looking to make a quick sale or to spend their pay before morning. Karen didn't come here often. The noise, the drink, the hustlers shouting over one another, none of it interested him. Tonight, he just needed a shortcut back to his apartment above his workshop. He was halfway through the square when a sharp crack split the air. It didn't sound like a weapon, more like a controlled strike on flesh. The crowd's laughter followed a moment later, cutting through the steady rain. Karen's first thought was to keep walking. Whatever was happening wasn't his concern. Then it came again, and he realized the laughter was louder than the pain. That stopped him. At the center of the square, under a flickering strip light, a wooden pallet had been set up as a makeshift platform. A violet-skinned woman knelt at a splintered post, her wrists loosely looped with rope. It wasn't enough to restrain her. It was there for display. She was young, mid-20s in human terms, and she kept her back straight despite the cold rain running down her neck. Her clothes had once been ceremonial. Crimson silk skirt cut to mid-thigh, a sash across her chest. Now they were torn, soaked through, and clinging to her frame. Her long silver hair was heavy with water, the strands sticking to her cheekbones. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to look at the people around her. The man running the display was broad and thick at the waist, wearing a patched leather coat and a merchant's armband. In one hand, he held a braided whip. In the other, he counted a few damp bills from the last spectator. $1, one whip, he shouted, his voice carrying over the rain. You choose where. Anywhere. His grin was wide, teeth stained from years of spice chewing. Karen recognized the type immediately. He'd seen them at loading docks, in backroom trades, in the cheap fight pits. Men who thrived on making cruelty a public sport. He also recognized the woman's body language, the locked jaw, the steady breathing, someone forcing themselves not to give a reaction, even if it meant burning through the last of their strength. He should have walked away. This was not his problem. He told himself as much, but his feet carried him forward anyway. The woman's name, he didn't know it yet, was Naira. She was Zyrene Allen, a hybrid heritage that didn't earn much sympathy in this part of the colony. Hybrids were often treated as outsiders by both of their parent races, too different to belong anywhere. Karen guessed her presence here meant she had no clan or sponsor to protect her. He didn't need the details to see that she'd been reduced to nothing more than a spectacle for drunk men with a spare dollar. The whip cracked again, the leather cutting through the wet air. She flinched, not from pain, Karen noticed, but from the roar of laughter that followed. Something twisted in his gut. He stepped up onto the edge of the platform. The boards were slick and flexed under his boots. The trader turned toward him with a grin. You here to take a turn, Archivist? He asked, his tone mocking. $1. Make it count. I want her, Karen said, voice steady. The trader's eyebrows rose. You want her? Then pay like everyone else. Start with her arm, maybe her back. Crowd loves that. He offered Karen the whip. I'm not paying to hurt her, Karen replied. Then you're not paying at all, the man said, shrugging. Show goes on. Karen unbuttoned the inner flap of his coat and removed a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside were his precision tools, micro picks, fiber probes, a ceramic solder wand. Everything he used to bring dead Starship records back to life. The tools were worth more than a week's wages in the market. He set them on the crate beside the trader. You take these, Karen said, and she walks away now. The trader picked up the solder wand, turning it over in his hand, testing the balance. He glanced at the crowd, looking for approval. Nice, he said, but I like the whip better. Tell you what, give me the tools, and you take one swing. Any spot you like. Karen stared at him without speaking. The rain tapped against the crate between them. Then Karen took the whip, wrapped the leather around his left hand twice, and yanked. The tip tore clean off, dropping to the pallet with a wet slap. Gasps came from the crowd. The trader's face hardened. Karen leaned closer. No contract posted. No consent marker. You're running this under merchant awning without terms. You know that's market code violation. The warden down the row won't ignore it if I walk over and tell him. The trader glanced over Karen's shoulder toward the edge of the square. A warden in a faded uniform sat drinking tea at a stall, his cap low. The man's presence was enough. The trader's smirk faltered. Karen didn't blink. Take the tools and end it. The merchant's jaw shifted. He swept the tools into his sack, then jerked his chin at Naira. Untie yourself. She rose slowly, legs stiff from kneeling in the cold. The rope fell to the pallet. The broken chain links at her ankles clinked against her skin. She stepped down without looking back. Karen stepped off beside her. Can you walk? I can walk, she said. Her voice was controlled, her eyes forward. They left the platform together, weaving through the rows of market stalls. The rain soaked through Karen's coat, but he stayed close enough to block anyone from brushing against her. At the far side of the square, his building waited above a shuttered workshop. He unlocked the side door and stepped in. Warm, dry air met them inside. She stopped at the threshold, eyes scanning the room. I'm not yours, she said. I know, he said. He set a folded blanket on the couch. Stay warm tonight. She didn't answer. She walked inside, sat down, and placed her satchel beside her. Karen closed the door and listened to the rain outside. He didn't know why he'd stopped in that square, only that once he had, walking away had no longer been an option. The door latch clicked into place, and the building settled around the sound. Pipes ticking in the walls and the coil on the stove humming at a steady pitch, while steam drifted from the kettle and fogged the small window above the sink, and Karen stood there cataloging the room through her eyes to make sure nothing would corner her by accident. Door in sight. Window in sight. Knife block visible. Exits clear. No surprises on the floor that could make her slip. And when he finished that scan, he noticed his heartbeat had slowed because the square outside was now a dull smear of neon and rain with the laughter gone. He kept his voice even and practical. There's a washroom through that door. Clean towel on the hook. The water is hot if you turn the left valve all the way. Take what time you want. She stood near the threshold with the satchel gripped against her ribs and tracked each object with the focus of someone who had learned to map rooms in seconds. And when her eyes reached the drawer he had pointed out earlier, she spoke without moving. You said there is a tunic. Top drawer. He stepped back from it so she would not feel watched. I'll stay by the stove. She crossed the room with care, the wet skirt pulling at her thighs, the broken chain links at her ankles clicking against bone, and she opened the drawer and lifted one of his dark work tunics and held it in both hands like she was testing the weight. Then she nodded once and went into the washroom, leaving the door open by 2 fingers width and placing the satchel on the floor where her hand could reach it in one step. Karen set 2 cups on the table and poured hot water over dry leaf. Then he stripped the blanket from the back of the couch and shook water off its edge and laid another on the floor beside it, because there was no chance he would sleep on the couch tonight. And when he finished, he walked to the workshop door and pulled it open to check the bench out of habit, because the part of his mind that kept count of tools and repairs did not go quiet just because the square had gone quiet, and he saw the empty slots in the foam where the picks and the solder wand should have been, and felt the loss as a clean bite behind the ribs, not regret, just cost. He had work in the morning. He had told the guild he would audit a derelict recorder pulled from a tug that had scraped a reef at Canal 23, and he had promised to bring it up to readable state by end of week, and he had given away the tools that made that timeline possible. And he heard his own voice in his head running through options with the same calm he used for damaged logs. Borrow a wand from Jin in the parts lane for a deposit. Rebuild a coarse probe from spares. Take the penalty on the contract if needed, except that he would explain in person instead of sending a note. And in the middle of that calculation, he heard water in the washroom shut off. Naira came out with her hair towel-dried and darker from the damp. The tunic knotted at one hip to hang like a short skirt. Her ankles still marked by the faint lines of the old chains, and she kept the satchel close with one hand while the other pressed the towel to her collarbone, where the sash had rubbed her raw. And he saw the places where the whip had found skin, even though most strikes had been light, because the traitor needed her to last the night. Thin welts on her back and on the outside of her left arm, water still sliding along the lines and into the fabric. He did not step closer. There's antiseptic in the cabinet if you want it. You can use it yourself. If you want help, say so. She looked at the cabinet, then at him, then back to the cabinet. I will do it, she said, and went to the sink and opened the door and took out the small clear bottle and the cotton and hissed once when it touched the skin on her arm. Face steady again in the next breath. He gave her space and used the moment to lay out simple rules in plain terms, because leaving anything unspoken tonight would build pressure they could not carry. You can lock the door from the inside with the chain. I won't touch it. I'm sleeping on the floor beside the couch. If you need to leave before I wake, go. If you want me to open the shop early, so you don't have to share the stairwell with morning traffic, tell me now. I will leave the chain on, she said, checking the hinge. I will not run. I want to sleep without moving for once. Good. He slid one of the cups toward the corner of the table closest to her. She picked it up, tested the heat with a short sip, and kept it in both hands for warmth. He noticed the small tremor in her fingers and understood it was not fear of him so much as the body coming down from public exposure and controlled breathing and noise, and the human part of him that filed things under simple names gave a label he could work with, stress drop. He sat on the floor with his back to the cabinets, not facing her directly, and took his own tea. I need to say something straight. I don't expect anything from you. Not work, not payment, not your company. I stopped because I could. If you leave in the morning, that is your choice. She studied him over the rim of the cup, eyes pale, gold, and level. Men who say that usually ask for something later. Then watch me later, he said. Decide then. Her jaw loosened a fraction. Why did you stop? Not the words you used for the traitor. The real reason. He did not inflate it. 2 years ago at the docks, a man was beating a worker behind a crate stack while 3 others laughed. I heard it, and I kept walking because my delivery was late, and I told myself it was not my business. I saw the worker's face the next day. I could have made it stop, and I didn't. I remember that when I hear laughter like that. She nodded once and set the cup down, not to end the subject, but to store it for later. Why are you here on Voron's Edge, Karen Thale? I was born here. I left for 5 years to work on a survey ship as a log tech. They wanted me to sign another 3-year contract with travel outside the trade ring. I said no and came home. I fix broken records for ships that can still pay and for ones that can't if the story matters. I live above my shop because I don't like noise in the halls. What is your aim? She said blunt. Men like aims. They make them feel less empty. He answered with the same bluntness. I want to build a map of what happened here during the blackout years when the canals froze and half the dock records vanished. It is selfish. I like clean lines and missing pieces put back where they belong. It also helps families who need proof of a trip or a wage. That is the only mission I have. She stood with her back to the window and let that sit. She did not share anything for 2 breaths, 3. Then she placed the satchel on the table and unbuckled the strap with care, watching him as much as the bag. Inside lay a folded document in a protective sleeve, a small metal tag on a chain, and a wrapped bundle of fabric the size of a hand. She lifted the sleeve so he could see without reaching. Work approval for the textile shed on Dock 9. Expired last month. The owner said I could renew if I brought a sponsor or a fee. I had neither. The trader let me sleep behind his stall 2 nights for a promise of help. His help was the platform. Karen kept his hands flat on his knees. Why the tag? She turned the small metal oval so the stamped letters faced the light. The name was Allen script on one side and Colonial Standard on the other. Lurie's NAI, a registry tag with a subnumber. My mother's tag. She died 3 winters ago. They stripped the rest from her. Not this. I took it when the body crew looked away. And the cloth, he asked, because the audience would want to know and because she had put on the table like something that needed to be named. She unwrapped it with care. Inside lay a narrow red sash with 3 thin silver threads running along one edge, frayed now but still bright. ceremonial sash from the home quarter. It was mine. I kept it for days when I wanted to feel like I had not vanished. She watched his face for judgment and found none, only attention. Then she wrapped the sash again and put it back into the satchel. That is why I was there. Not because of a crime, because I ran out of options and asked the wrong man for a floor. He breathed once, steady. Then here's a better floor for now. Do not make it sound kind, she said, not cruel, but alert to words that tied strings. It is practical. It is dry. It has heat. She accepted that description with a silent nod. Then her eyes lowered to the broken links at her ankles. The metal had rubbed skin raw where the edges bit. She touched one and flinched. Can you remove these without leaving me worse? Yes, if you agree. I gave him my fine tools. I have a handsaw with a fine tooth and a clamp. It will be slow and loud if I rush it. I won't rush it. You will stay where I can see your hands, she said. I will set the bench by the window so you can watch, he said. And he stood and went down the steps of the workshop and brought up a small vise, a hacksaw, a wedge, and a shallow tray of water and a towel to catch filings. And he set the vise on the table by the window where the street light made a clear pool of white, and he placed the tools in a line with space between them so nothing looked like a surprise rush. And he waited for her to choose the chair or the couch. She sat on the couch and extended her left foot with the ankle turn so he could reach the link without making her change her position. And he knelt on the floor a good arm's length away and held up the wedge so she could see the motion, slow and open. May I touch your ankle to set the wedge? He asked, and he waited for the yes because anything else would break what they were building. Yes, she said, eyes on his hands, body still. And he slid the wedge under the link and tightened the vise jaw until it bit just enough to keep the metal from turning. Then he sawed with short, controlled strokes, not fast, not showy, blade whispering through cheap alloy, the sound clean and regular, water cooling the metal, steam rising in thin lines. And he paused every few strokes and said what he was doing before he did it. And when the link gave, he stopped, took out the wedge, and set the cut piece in the tray. So she could see where it had gone, he moved to the right ankle and repeated the work. And when both links lay open and harmless in the tray, he showed her the shallow cuts on the metal edges and the fact that her skin was intact except for the old abrasion. And he cleaned the skin with antiseptic and handed her the bottle so she could treat it herself while he stepped back and put the saw on the counter and washed his hands at the sink because the smell of wet alloy and the bite of antiseptic mixed with the tea in a way that felt like a workshop more than a home. She flexed her feet and looked at her ankles and then at him with a guarded relief that did not turn into a smile. Thank you, she said, the first unforced thanks of the night, small and even. You're welcome, he said, matching the size of it. I kept it for days when I wanted to feel like I had not vanished. She watched his face for judgment and found none, only attention. Then she wrapped the sash again and put it back into the satchel. That is why I was there. Not because of crime, because I ran out of options and asked the wrong man for a floor. He breathed once, steady. Then here's a better floor for now. Do not make it sound kind, she said, not cruel, but alert to words that tied strings. It is practical. It is dry. It has heat. She accepted that description with a silent nod. Then her eyes lowered to the broken links at her ankles. The metal had rubbed skin raw where the edges bit. She touched one and flinched. Can you remove these without leaving me worse? Yes, if you agree. I gave him my fine tools. I have a handsaw with a fine tooth and a clamp. It will be slow and loud if I rush it. She gathered the cut links and held them in her hand like proof. Then she stood and looked at the couch and the door and the chain. I will sleep now. I will keep the satchel with me. I expected that, he said. He turned off the coil and moved the cup to the sink and laid his blanket on the floor beside the couch with his head near the cabinet, so he would not be between her and the door. And he folded his arm under his head and watched the window fog clear and return with each draft while she lay on her side with the satchel tucked against her stomach and the blanket pulled to her chin. Her eyes opened longer than she wanted because another person in the room kept her brain on guard even when her body was done. After a minute, she spoke into the quiet. Tomorrow the trader will say you broke his whip and stole his show. He will want to make noise. He can make noise, Karen said. The warden will not move if there is paperwork. He hates it. I know his face. He will look down and drink his tea. The trader will keep his stall because I paid. He will not come up these stairs. He cares about his booth more than his pride. You sound certain, she said. I'm not certain, he said. I am reading in the way I read a bad board. Loose screws, noisy and still working. It holds until it doesn't. Tonight it holds. She accepted that with a slow blink and turned her face toward the window. If I stay for one day, I want to go to Dock 9. I want to see if the shed will renew if I have a sponsor. I'm not asking you to be that. I want to ask for the person beside me, so they take me seriously. I can walk you there, he said, simple. I know the foreman. He respects schedules and clean invoices. If he says no, I will not argue unless you want me to. She thought about that and let out one long breath that emptied the last of her stiffness. Good. We go after breakfast. I will not be slow. Breakfast is stale bread and eggs, he said. No ceremony. She closed her eyes. Ceremony is for people who are seen. Silence stretched, an easy one, not empty. Street noise faded as stalls shut their shutters. Water in the pipes hummed. The building across the lane clicked as a relay cut power to a sign. Karen's mind returned for a moment to his missing tools and the recorder due at the guild, and he ran through the plan again. Visit Jin at first light, borrow for a deposit, tell the guild what he did in the square if they pressed the deadline, accept the frown and the shrug, finish the job by hand if he must, and let his back ache for it. And while he thought and listened, he felt something in the room shift by a degree. Naira had eased the satchel an inch away from the tight hold at her ribs, so it now rested against the inside of her forearms on the blanket, not on her skin, a change small enough to pass without comment, but large enough to register as trust warming by a single notch. And he let the fact exist without rewarding it with words because naming it now would make it smaller. He turned his face toward the cabinet and closed his eyes with both hands flat on the blanket where the floor could cool them. And before sleep, he set one more thing in his head so it would not surprise him in the morning. He had taken someone out of crowd for one night. He would not make promises beyond what he could carry. He would offer structure and let her set the distance. And if she chose to leave after Dock 9, he would open the door and not follow. And if she chose to stay, he would. Buy another pillow and clear a shelf for her satchel, so it did not have to sleep in her arms forever. He slept in pieces and woke twice to the sound of her shifting on the couch, and each time checked the chain in the corner of his vision and the rectangle of the door and the steady line of her breathing. And when the gray that meant morning replaced the blue that meant night, he sat up slow, and the air smelled like wet stone from the lane and cooled tea. And Naira was already awake with her eyes on the door and her hand on the satchel, ready to test the next part of the day under rules they had said out loud. Morning on Voron's Edge did not begin with sunlight. It began with the dull grind of carts over wet stone, the muffled thump of crates on the docks, and the faint metallic groan of the canal lifts coming to life. From the open window above the street, the damp air drifted in, carrying the mixed smells of diesel residue, boiled root vegetables, and brine from the canal water below. Karen had been up for half an hour, moving quietly in the small kitchen, letting the sound of the pan and kettle mark the start of the day without talking yet. Naira sat at the table with the satchel on her lap, the chain still hooked on the door behind her. She watched him with the same steady gold-eyed focus she had given the market square the night before, tracking hands, scanning surroundings, noting exits. Her hair was still a little damp from the wash the previous night, combed through with her fingers but uneven in places where it had dried on its own. The dark tunic was knotted at her hip the same way, and her bare legs were folded under the chair. Karen set a plate in front of her, 2 fried eggs and a piece of toasted bread. It's not much, but it's hot. She didn't touch it at first. You eat first, she said, testing whether the rule here was different for what she knew. He sat across from her and took a bite, not making a point of it, not watching her while he did. That was enough. She picked up the bread and bit into it slowly, chewing with care, as if she wasn't sure yet if she'd keep it down. He noticed her glance at the window between bites, as though measuring the distance if she had to leave fast. We'll go to Dock 9 when you're ready, he said, breaking the silence. The foreman there, Havel, has been in charge for 20 years. He'll remember me. Her eyes narrowed. You've worked for him? Restored 2 of his shipping logs last winter, Karen said. He keeps things by the book. If he says no, It's not personal, it's procedure. She looked down at her plate. Procedure can be personal when someone looks at my skin first. Karen didn't argue. That's why I'm going with you. He won't pretend I'm not there. She considered this while eating the rest of the bread. Her silence wasn't refusal. It was the kind where someone weighed the risk of being seen with another person in public. When they were done, Karen rinsed the plates and set them in the rack. He turned to her. Before we leave, I want to know, if the doc won't renew your permit, do you have another place in mind? Her fingers tightened on the satchel strap. I'll find one, she said, but there was no plan in her voice. He didn't push. He already suspected the truth. She had nowhere else lined up. It was why she had risked asking a stranger for help before ending up in the trader's hands. She stood, checking the satchel's contents, registry tag, folded document, wrapped sash, without removing them. It was the same ritual as the night before, making sure nothing had shifted. She didn't ask if she could bring it. She simply slung it over her shoulder like a natural extension of herself. Karen locked the apartment door behind them, letting her walk ahead on the narrow stairs so she wouldn't feel blocked in. They stepped out into the street, the morning drizzle settling over the lane. Market stalls were opening, their canvas covers snapping in the wind. They didn't speak much on the walk. Karen's mind ran over the conversation he expected at the dock office. Havel would ask questions about her work record, her sponsorship, her reasons for lapse. Karen would answer the ones he could and leave the rest to her. He didn't want to speak for her, but he knew how quickly silence could be read as guilt. At the edge of Dock 9, the wide platform stretched over the water, cranes swinging in slow arcs as cargo was shifted from one barge to another. The main office was a squat concrete building with reinforced windows and a sliding steel door. Inside, the heat was dry and the air smelled faintly of old oil and paper. Havel sat behind a steel desk, his uniform neat despite the scuffed boots. He was a tall, spare man with a face lined from years of squinting against dock glare. He looked up from a ledger as they entered. Karen Thale, he said, voice flat but not unfriendly. I thought you'd be in the guild hall today. Job later, Karen said. I'm here for her. He stepped aside, so Naira was fully visible. She wants to renew her work approval for the textile shed. Havel's gaze went to Naira. He didn't hide the way his eyes flicked to her skin and her hybrid features before returning to the document she held out. She kept her hand steady, her chin level. It expired, Havel said, taking the sleeve. No sponsor, no fee. I'll cover the fee, Karen said immediately. Havel glanced at him. You know how this works. I can take your money, but the owner has final say. The shed's private. If he doesn't want to renew, that's the end. Naira spoke for the first time since stepping inside. Then ask him. While we're here. Havel studied her for a moment, then pressed a button on the desk. Calm, run, get up here. Now. A minute later, the owner came in, a stocky man with grease under his nails and a quick, assessing look. His eyes landed on Naira, then shifted to Karen. This about her? Yes, Havel said. Wants her permit renewed. Fees covered. The owner crossed his arms. We don't have space for people who bring trouble. She worked for you before? Karen asked. 3 months, the man said. Fast hands, decent with the looms. But then she stopped showing up. No message, no return. Now she comes back with someone else standing behind her. Looks bad. Naira's voice cut in, even controlled. I left because the boarding house I paid for locked me out and sold my clothes. I had no place to sleep. I didn't miss work for sport. The owner's expression shifted slightly, the edge of defensiveness softening. You could have told me. I told your foreman, she said. He said he'd pass it on. He didn't. The owner looked at Havel. Havel didn't speak. The silence stretched. Finally, the owner exhaled through his nose. 1 month. Trial basis. No mistakes, no absences. You miss once, it's done. Naira gave a single nod. Understood. The man left without another word. Havel filled out the renewal form, stamped it, and slid it across the desk. Starts tomorrow. Be here at dawn. Outside, the drizzle had turned to light rain again. Naira held the stamped paper against her chest as they walked back toward the market lanes. She didn't thank Karen. He didn't expect her to. But halfway down the street, she said quietly, If you hadn't come, he would have said no before I opened my mouth. Karen kept his gaze forward. Maybe, but you spoke for yourself. That's what made him change his mind. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull ahead either. They walked side by side all the way back to the apartment, the satchel still in her grip, but her steps lighter than when they'd left. He noticed it and decided not to point it out. Some things didn't need to be spoken yet. The rain eased by late afternoon, leaving the streets outside Karen's workshop slick and smelling faintly of salt from the canal mist. Inside the apartment, the air was warm from the kettle on the stove and the slow heat of the radiator. Karen was at his workbench downstairs, leaning over the stripped navigation core from the tug job he'd been putting off. The borrowed solder wand from Jin was heavier than his old one, its balance slightly off, but it would get the job done. Upstairs, Naira had claimed the couch, the satchel still within reach, but now resting on the floor beside her instead of her lap. She'd rolled up the sleeves of his tunic and was mending a tear along the hem with a short, precise stitch. She worked quickly, not as if she enjoyed it, but as if the task kept her from thinking too much. When Karen came back up to check the kettle, she looked up briefly. "You make tea every night?" "Most nights," he said. "Boils fast. Warms the place." She didn't comment, but when he poured the water over the leaves and set her cup on the table, she didn't hesitate this time before taking it. Karen sat on the chair opposite, both of them silent for a while. He knew the space between them had shifted since the dock that morning. She'd spoken directly to the owner, hadn't looked for him to do it for her. But he also knew the risk she'd taken, showing her face in a place where she could easily be dismissed without reason. "Tomorrow you'll be at the shed," he said finally. "Long hours, dawn to late shift. If the looms run clean, I'll be out before dark." He nodded. "Key's on the hook by the door. You can lock it from the inside or outside." She glanced at him over the rim of her cup. "You trust me to come back?" "I trust you to do what you decide," he said. She seemed to weigh that, then gave a short, almost amused exhale. Not many men would say that. They let the conversation fade again. The quiet was no longer tense. It was the kind that allowed thought. Karen watched her hands as she set the cup down. Her fingers were steady now, the tremor from the night before gone. Later, while she rinsed the cups without being asked, he took the small cut links from her ankles out of the tray on the shelf and set them in a small paper envelope. He didn't mention it, just left it on the table where she'd see it. She noticed when she came back from the sink. Her fingers brushed the envelope but didn't open it. "You keep things tidy," she said. "I work better when I know where everything is." "Even the things you don't need anymore?" she asked, glancing at the envelope. He met her gaze. "Especially those." She didn't press for meaning, but her eyes stayed on him a moment longer than before. By the time they settled in for the night, the chain was on the door again, but this time she placed her satchel at the far end of the couch instead of clutching it. He noticed, filed it away, and said nothing. When she lay down, she spoke into the dim light, her voice quieter than the night before. "The trader at the square? He'll talk. People will hear. They'll talk for a day," Karen said. "Then they'll find something else. That's how this place works. Has it ever been about you before?" "Once," he said, and left it there. She didn't push for more. The radiator hissed. The building settled, and Karen lay on the floor knowing the distance between them had shortened by inches, even if neither of them named it yet. The air before dawn was colder than the night before, a damp chill that clung to the skin and made the walk to Dock 9 feel longer than it was. The sky over Voron's Edge was a dull slate. No stars, just the reflection of the dock lights bouncing off low clouds. The canal water below the grating was dark and restless, carrying the hum of generators and the low groan of shifting cargo. Karen walked beside Naira in silence, letting her set the pace. She carried no extra bag, only the satchel, and she had tied her silver hair back with a thin strip of cloth. The tunic was hers now. She knotted it at the hip again, but the cut was neat, deliberate, not improvised. Her bare legs moved easily despite the morning cold, and she kept her eyes forward, not on him, not on the people who glanced as they passed. At the entrance to the textile shed, the smell of machine oil and dyed fabric drifted out with the warm air. The foreman, a broad man with a missing index finger, stood by the door. He gave Karen a short nod, but looked at Naira longer, his gaze calculating. "You're here early," he said to her. "I start on time," she replied. He grunted approval and gestured her inside. "Loom 3's yours. Keep it running, clear the feed when it sticks. If you can keep pace, you'll keep the job." She stepped through the door without looking back. Karen watched her blend into the rows of machinery, her violet skin distinct against the muted grays and browns of the workers. Yet she moved like she belonged there, hands already on the controls, eyes scanning for problems before they started. Karen turned and left. His part of the morning was done. He still had a guild job to deliver, and the sooner he finished it, the sooner he could decide whether this arrangement, her here, him, in his workshop, was something temporary or not. By the time he returned home and set to work at the bench, the thought kept looping in his mind. She hadn't once asked when he'd be back, but she'd also not given any sign she meant to leave today. He told himself it didn't matter. When Naira came back that evening, the sky was darker than it should have been for the hour, heavy rain moving in again. She stepped inside without speaking, kicked off her damp sandals, and locked the door. The satchel went to its place by the couch. "How was it?" Karen asked from the kitchen, not looking up from the pan. "They watched me," she said simply, pulling the hair tie free. "Not for mistakes, just to see if I'd be the same as before." "And I wasn't," she said, meeting his eyes for a moment before looking at the steam rising from the pan. They ate at the table in a quiet that wasn't tense. He noticed her movements had changed, less guarded, more at ease with the space. She'd hung her tunic on the back of the chair instead of keeping it on while she ate. The couch had no chain between it and the door. Halfway through the meal, she asked the trader at the square, "If I saw him again, would you stop me from saying something?" Karen set his fork down. "I'd stop you if it meant putting you back in a position he could use against you. Words can be twisted. Actions stay." She thought about it, nodded once, and finished her plate. That night, the satchel stayed on the couch's far end again, but she slept on her back instead of curled away, one arm resting over her stomach. Karen saw it before turning off the light, an unconscious signal she wasn't expecting to wake to trouble. The rain came in steady after midnight, filling the room with a soft, constant sound. Karen lay on the floor, eyes closed, realizing the apartment didn't feel like Justice anymore. It wasn't a thought he'd planned on having, but it was there all the same. By the second morning, the walk to Dock 9 had a rhythm. No talk until halfway there, the same quiet lanes, the same dockhands giving short nods without slowing. Naira wore the tunic again, sleeves rolled high, hair tied back tighter than the day before. The satchel stayed over her shoulder until they reached the shed entrance. She didn't glance at Karen as she stepped inside, and he didn't wait around to watch. He noticed the difference in her posture, though less braced against what might happen, more focused on what she was walking toward. The shed was louder that day. The looms were running faster, the air thick with heat and the tang of dyed cloth. Naira's station was the same, loom 3, near the middle row. She settled in quickly, hands moving with practiced efficiency. On her second feed clear, a coworker leaned over, a short man with a scar across his cheek. "Didn't think you'd show your face here again," he said over the machine noise. She didn't look at him. "Then you were wrong." He smirked but didn't push it. By midday, her output was steady enough that the foreman stopped glancing her way every 10 minutes. She kept her head down and her pace even. On the third day, the tone changed. A younger worker, maybe 18, passed behind her and muttered something in Allen dialect. Quick, low, but not quiet enough. She caught the word for discarded. She turned sharply, her eyes locking on his. "Say it again," she said in the same language, voice flat. The boy's mouth tightened. He didn't. He moved on without a word. She went back to her loom, but her jaw stayed set for the rest of the shift. That evening, when she came through the apartment door, she didn't remove her sandals right away. She stood near the table, her eyes on Karen, who was leaning over a spread of dismantled circuit boards on the counter. "You've worked with people who don't want you there," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said, still soldering. "How do you make them stop looking at you like you don't belong?" He set the wand down and wiped his hands. "You can't make them stop looking. You can make them see they get nothing from it. No reaction, no weakness. Then one day, they stopped bothering because you were just there, same as them. She thought about that, then unknotted the tunic and hung it over the chair. I did that today. It felt unfinished. It will for a while, he said. That's how it works. They ate without talking much, but later, when he was at the bench in the corner of the apartment adjusting the fine contacts on a memory core, she moved closer without him noticing right away. She was looking at the piece under the lamp, her shadow crossing the work surface. Why do you keep your tools like this? She asked. So I know where they are without looking, he said. When you're working inside a sealed core, you can't take your eyes off it. One wrong move, and it's ruined. Her gaze stayed on his hands. You work like you don't want to touch the wrong thing. That's the point, he said. She leaned closer, studying the tiny contacts, and for a moment their shoulders were almost touching. Neither of them moved away immediately. When she did, it was without comment. She went back to the couch, pulling the blanket over her legs. But the rest of the night, the room felt different. Not louder, not warmer, just changed in a way that didn't need to be named yet. By the end of the week, the walk to Dock 9 had become second nature. They moved through the lanes like two people who had done it for years. Quiet at first, an occasional exchange when something in the street caught their eye, then silence again until they reached the shed gate. The foreman barely looked up when Naira passed him now, and her coworkers' stares had shifted from open appraisal to the quick, passing kind reserved for anyone who'd proven they could keep pace. That Friday, the rain had cleared and the air smelled faintly of sun-warmed stone and fabric dye from the open dock windows. Naira's shift ran longer than expected. When she finally stepped through the apartment door, her hair was loose, strands clinging to her neck from the heat of the looms. She closed the door with her hip and set the satchel down without locking the chain. Karen was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cooking. The scent of spiced root and seared fish filled the small room. He glanced up once, took in her state, loosened posture, flushed cheeks, and returned to the pan. You're late, he said simply. They needed one more run finished. I was faster than the next shift. She moved toward the couch, then stopped when she noticed the plates already set out. You cooked early. I guess you'd be hungry. Her eyes lingered on the food a moment before she sat. They ate without the usual formality. She didn't wait for him to start this time, and he didn't measure his portions. The day's work had stripped away the stiffness. Halfway through, she looked up. The trader from the square. If he tried that again with someone else, would you stop it? Yes, Karen said, not needing to think. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Even if it cost you more? Yes. She didn't answer right away, but the tension in her shoulders eased. After they finished, Karen carried the plates to the sink, and Naira followed without asking, drying them as he washed. It was the first time they'd shared the space like that, moving around each other without caution. Later, he went back to his bench to finish the memory core. She wandered over, curious, standing close enough that he could feel the faint brush of her arm against his when she leaned forward to see the contacts under the lamp. Show me, she said. He hesitated, then shifted the stool so she could sit. She took the fine probe in her hand, steady as if she'd done it before. Like this. Almost, he said, guiding her wrist, not gripping, just adjusting the angle. His hand stayed over hers a moment longer than necessary. She didn't move away. When she placed the probe down, she looked at him directly. You don't touch me unless I agree. I know, and I'm agreeing now. It was simple, without ceremony, but it cut through the weeks of careful space between them. He let his hand rest over hers again, and this time neither of them pretended it was only about the tool in front of them. That night, she didn't put the satchel on the couch. She left it by the wall. When she lay down, she faced him, eyes open until the light was off. The next morning came without rain. Light filtered through the thin curtains, pale and cool, carrying the smell of the docks even from several streets away. Naira was already awake, sitting on the couch with her hair down and a mug between her hands. The satchel was still by the wall where she had left it the night before. Karen came out of the kitchen with 2 plates, bread still warm from the pan, and sliced fruit he'd picked up early from a vendor he trusted. He set one in front of her without comment. She looked at it, then at him, and for once didn't wait for him to start eating first. You've been here a week, he said after a few bites. If you want your own place, I can help you find one. Her gaze stayed steady on his. I've had my own place before. It wasn't safe. This one is, he said. She set her cup down. Then I'll stay. Not because I can't leave, because I don't want to. Karen didn't move for a moment, letting the words settle. Then we make it official. Your key stays on the hook. You can use the workshop if you want. And you choose your space in here, where your things go, what you change. Her mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. I'll keep my space small for now. They finished eating in an easy silence. When she rose to clear the plates, she didn't take her satchel with her. That afternoon, she went to her shift at the shed. The foreman barely looked up when she arrived. She kept pace with the looms, answered curt questions from coworkers, and left without delay. There were still looks, there always would be, but fewer now. Word had spread that she was back, working and not folding under anyone's opinion. She returned to the apartment just as Karen was locking up the workshop below. They climbed the stairs together. Inside, she placed her satchel on the low shelf beside his neatly organized jars of screws. It stayed there. That night, after the chain was on the door, they sat at the table with tea, going over the simple details of the next day. His job at the guild, her shift hours, a small market trip. The talk was plain, but it felt like structure. Before they turned in, she stood by the couch and looked down at him on the floor. "You can sleep up here," she said, her tone matter of fact. "You sure?" "Yes." "I'm agreeing." He lay on top of the blanket, not crowding her, both of them facing the window. Outside, the dock lights reflected off the canal water in broken lines. The city noise was distant. She shifted once, closing the space between them until their shoulders touched. Neither of them spoke after that. The contact was simple, steady, and deliberate. No more guarded distance, no more unspoken testing. By the time she fell asleep, his breathing matched hers. The apartment smelled faintly of resin, tea, and the faint salt of the canal. Ordinary, lived in, and theirs. For the first time since Voron's Edge had become just another place to survive, it felt like a place to stay. And neither of them had to say it out loud to know they both meant it.